makeup. What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, and I'm here with my very good friend, Dr. Zayas G.O.D., Danny Torkel. We are here to talk about our first of 3 Dario Argento movies that we're going to be covering for this month. We have like a Dario Argento month for this Valentine's Day month. Danny, our friends who we haven't had on the show in a while, the Ghost Girls, the Ghost Girl Greetings, do they have like a Dario Argento card?
I'm not sure. They're constantly changing up what they have, and I know that they've branched off and they've started making like gifts, and like they have like lip balms, and they have candles, and they have tote bags, and all this great stuff, wrapping paper. I'm not sure if they did have like an exclusive line of products for this this indie horror movie called Blind, which was very much, I've seen the movie, it's very much based off of or inspired by Argento's work. It felt very Giallo-esque. So I'm sure they've been inspired by some of that stuff. I'm not sure if they have an Argento line of anything, though.
Gotcha.
But you should go to ghostgirlgreetings.com and check that out.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say they have these awesome cards, great artwork, has a picture that you recognize from a horror movie, and then there's like a pun, like this is not one of them, but like it would be something like, you have ghost face, and it'd be like, you make me scream or something like that, but it's even more clever than that. Oh, and yeah. With Argento, go ahead.
I mean, I'm gonna next month. We're recording this in early February. Exactly 1 month from today, I will be at Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they will be there selling their merch as they always are. I'm bringing Charlotte, so I'll have coverage from that Monster Mania. Probably do a video with them when I get there. So yeah, if you're panicking, or if you have Panico, Dario Argento connection, you can go to ghostgirlgreetings.com and get your significant other a really cute Valentine's Day card or some other cool stuff from their website.
Yeah. They don't even know we're plugging their shit right away in the beginning of our episode. But I was gonna say that like this movie, I think would have a lot of great images for a card. I mean, you could have what I've seen for the poster for this movie, which is like, the reporter, her face caught within her ripped shirt, and she has wide eyes. That's what I'm using for the thumbnail for this video. And that would make a great card. And it could be like, you make me want to take off my shirt or something. I don't know. Or like you could show the woman whose arm gets cut off and like she essentially just...
You make me want to spray the white walls with blood.
Right. Just something like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of amazing images in this movie, which I'm sure are throughout every Argento film. Now, I was going to ask you, Danny, how many Argento films have you seen? Have you seen every one of his films?
No, but there's the list of movies I've seen by him is more than the movies. So basically, from Argento and John Carpenter have a very similar career in the sense that they make movies in the 70s. It's towards the middle to end of the 70s where they hit what many people would consider their peak, and then they become like just and that peak carries over into the 80s. Like John Carpenter, you would probably go from Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976 until In the Mouth of Madness comes out in 1994, but like he had a few duds before that. Like They Live is 88. And that's like, if you go from like 76 to 88, you're like, that is peak John Carpenter. Dario Argento is very similar. He has some great movies in the early 70s, but then it's like Deep Red in 75 or 76, Suspiria a couple of years after that, and then you go into the 80s, and 88, I think, is when Opera comes out, 87 or 88. And after that, it kind of there's a slow decline.
Sure.
And I want to shout out the documentary Panico, which is on Shudder.
Okay.
I just did a short review of this. It will be up on our channel before this is. It's a really good documentary, and it does talk about like the shift in his work. There's a lot to do with his studio. Italian horror on the whole kind of went downhill after the 80s, even though there's some great work being done. It kind of like fades out.
Yeah.
Shudder is going to have Della Morte Della More, aka Cemetery Man, coming up very soon, which is by Michel Suave, who is actually in this movie as a cameo, and he's one of the constant collaborators of Argento. That movie came out in '94. It's one of my favorite friggin' movies. But yeah, like I think he moved a lot of his production to the United States, and I think the U.S. distributors didn't really understand his work, and they kind of, his movies in the 90s, I've only seen a couple of, and they are not as good. But 70s and 80s, with very few exceptions, I've seen basically everything.
Wow. Awesome, man. Okay.
It was one of the first things. I told the story to my buddy Jared, who is one of the guys who does the Puppet Masters, Castle Freaks, Charlie Band podcast. Shout out to them.
Yeah.
But we went to see Tenebrae at the IFC Center in Manhattan. They were doing a Panic Attacks Dario Argento retrospective, and we were talking about how I completely lost where I started. What?
You were talking about how like you watched all these Argento movies. Yeah.
Thank you. Like talking to myself into a spiral.
Oh no! It's
when the not
detective.
when the pandemic started.
Yeah.
The first two things I did as a horror fan, as a film fan, were I watched as many Dario Argento films as I could that were either on streaming or on VOD.
Yeah.
And then I watched all the James Bond movies in a row.
That sounds like fun.
Those were the first two things I did in like the spring of 2020 when I was like locked in my house. We were doing remote learning for like half a school day. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to watch Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and now I'm going to watch Deep Red again, and now I'm going to watch Suspiria, and now I'm going to watch Inferno, and it's just in order. I also just started introducing Charlotte to Argento movies. We watched Suspiria. I felt like that was a logical first step because that's probably his most well-known movie.
Right.
And then we watched one of my favorites, called Creepers in the United States, or Phenomena as I know it better, with a very young Jennifer
Connelly.
Jennifer Connelly and Donald Pleasance, a chimpanzee with a straight razor. It is one of the most insane movies you'll ever watch. I absolutely loved it. But yeah, I love Dario Argento. I really do. I feel like there is nothing quite like Italian horror cinema. I did go back. I've watched a lot of Mario Bava, who's basically like the father of Italian horror cinema. I've watched a lot of his Giallo work. I mean,
sure.
And then when he got into slasher horror, Bay of Blood, which I don't consider to be Bava's greatest film, that like Friday the 13th Part 2 like effectively lifts entire scenes out of that movie and just like it's not even an homage. It's just like, here, we're going to do that scene again. So he was greatly inspirational. He actually worked with Argento on a lot of stuff in the 70s. I know he was on the set of Inferno because Argento was like sick. I think he had hepatitis. He was very sick when he was making Inferno, and like Mario Bava was like there to like, all right, don't worry, I got this for the day. So like, and then Lamberto Bava and Michel Suave, they're like assistant directors and they're constant collaborators. we also have to mention probably the most important part of this movie, which is Claudio Simonetti, Fabio Pignatelli, and Massimo Morante, the three guys who do the score in this movie, which is one of the all-time greatest scores in horror movie history. I will put this score up there against the Halloween theme. I fucking love it. And like when I saw this in the theater just a few days ago, I was like in bed that night, and I'm like, give me the goblin, right? And
give me the goblin. Yes.
I mean, and Simonetti worked with Argento on so many of his great movies. It's like, again, you know, like John Carpenter does his own music, but like what makes a John Carpenter movie is the John Carpenter score. What helps make an Argento movie is the music, and that is very often Goblin or Claudio Simonetti, or in this case, you know, these three guys. In Inferno, he got Keith Emerson to do the music, and it's friggin' amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more I know this is your first foray into Argento.
Yeah.
So like when you get to watch more, you will hear these awesome scores. It's really what separates Argento from like other directors. You know, it's why I always consider him and Carpenter, the time periods that they were working, the time periods where they had their like peak 10 to 15 year period, and the music in their movies, just awesome. Sorry, I went on like a long, if you can't tell, I have a very strong passion for this stuff. I was like, when you were like, let's cover Argento, there was like a part of me that was like, oh God, I really hope that we don't come on to this review and Pete's like, well, I really hated this movie. Let me tell you why. And I'd be like, no.
Oh, no, it's all good, man. It's funny, we're 12 minutes in now at this point. I think you have a bit to say about Dario Argento.
I fucking love his work in the 70s and 80s is almost unparalleled.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack with what you just said. One of the things I've been writing letterboxd reviews for movies as we review them on our show now, and I wrote this one quote about the music. I don't know if it makes sense or if it's just gibberish, but I wrote, just as John Williams' music is what makes Star Wars an epic space opera, the score of Tenebrae makes it a living Vogue magazine being read by its killer, who is wanking to the pictures of beautiful women while he despises them. I don't know if that's on point or not, but that's the score.
A fairly good description of what the
yeah. It's for the music, like this movie, to me, it's very interesting because I had these expectations for a Dario Argento film. I've never watched one. I'm 41 years old. You mentioned how the Argento movies, they kind of had this peak just around the same time that Carpenter had his peak, and like from the 90s on, it's not as prevalent. And it's funny because you and I do cover a lot of foreign horror films on this channel, but it seems like we don't cover a lot of Italian-made modern horror films on this channel. Like, it seems like this is kind of the golden age. And then I can't think of a movie that you and I have reviewed or had in our top 10 that was from Italy. There's tons of movies from, you know, Romania and all this other kind of shit, but Italy,
even like when you think of like, when you think of like European countries, right?
Yeah.
Like, the British make, like, that's like the home of folk horror, right? Yeah. British folk horror. Then you have like French extremists, which is a recent movement, early 2000s, where you started to get these like ultra gory French horror films like Martyrs and Inside, which I believe we covered Inside. And we've talked about these French movies though, like High Tension and you know, Frontiers. These are like ultra gory, like they're political, they're making political points in their horror movies. Then of course, you know, there's Spanish horror, there's, you start to get into like I can't think of Speak No Evil was a Dutch Danish production.
Right.
And then, of course, when other foreign horror we talk about there's a lot of stuff coming out of Asia, whether it's South Korea or the Philippines or Indonesia. There's all this great, scary horror movies coming out of the Far East, coming out of all these places. Last year, my number one horror film was from Argentina.
Right.
And you have directors like Demian Rugna. So foreign horror is thriving right now.
Yeah.
And it's been, and I think that there is something in the 90s and the documentary, and again, Panico, it does talk about this, how like there was a shift. And I think there's also a government shift in Italy that I'm not
Okay.
completely aware of, where I think they kind of tighten the screws on like what was being shown in Italian cinema.
Yeah.
But yeah, you look at the movies that came out, like Bava worked in the 60s and 70s. Lucio Fulci was working in the from the very late 60s, almost at the same time period Argento is, early 70s. And then he starts making probably his most infamous works, the Gates of Hell trilogy, Zombie. They come out in like the late 70s to early 80s as well. And yeah, like you'll get like this rogue, amazing movie like Cemetery Man, which that you need to watch next week when it comes out on Shudder.
Okay.
That is a perfect Valentine's Day movie, but probably not perfect enough to watch with any of our significant others.
Right.
But yeah, like you'll get a rogue movie like that. But even like Demons, Lamberto Bava's Demons comes out in, I think, 85, and then the sequel comes out a few years later. And then it's like, yeah, the movies, they kind of, I don't want to say they dry up, but it doesn't feel like there's this dearth of great Italian horror cinema after. Like, and I think if you look at the word, like the movies that Argento makes, so like, I'll give you a perfect example. His Three Mothers trilogy is Suspiria, Inferno, and then you have to wait like 25 years. And Mother of Tears comes out in like 2006, and it's streaming free on Tubi. I have it queued up. I want to watch it. I've never seen it before, but I've heard nothing but bad things about it.
Oh no.
Critically. Yeah, and like I love Suspiria, and I actually think I like Inferno more. So for like Mother of Tears to be like this super disappointing third entry in a trilogy, it's like annoying, and he makes a lot of movies with his daughter in the 90s, and the documentary gets into this. It's very awkward, where like he's like an adult director who's filming like sex scenes with his adult daughter in these movies, and she, you can tell that there's that there's sadness there. There's like I highly recommend the documentary, but it does get like a little heavy at points, especially when Asia Argento is being interviewed. So yeah, like the work in the 90s kind of, it does feel like there's a dramatic shift. It's not as bright. It's not as colorful. This movie is colorful. It's, it's loud with the score.
Right.
It's pumping with that synth music. It's got, absolutely stunning visuals. Bright red blood on bright white backgrounds. Like you can't ask for like the settings. It's got that like feverish pace. There's just it's got the quirky comedy that like you feel like, am I supposed to be laughing out loud at this moment? And like, yeah, that was actually like bizarrely funny. Okay. Like you have John Saxon obsessed with his hat the whole movie, and it adds like a unique thing to this movie. Because like, you look back at like some of these films and you're like, which one was Tenebrae? Which one was the one with John Saxon and his hat? Oh, Tenebrae. Okay, yeah.
Yes. I gotta say that, like, being that this was my first Argento movie, I was actually really surprised and happily surprised that John Saxon was in it. You know, I haven't seen a lot of John Saxon movies, but like all the kind of cliche ones that, like, you know, everyone knows him from, like especially Nightmare on Elm Street, like that's where I've seen him. And I think he's great in this. I think he's charming. I didn't realize that the movie was going to focus on an American character and that the whole thing was going to be in English. I thought I was going to be watching subtitles for this. But
A lot
I
of
wanted,
Argento's movies, a lot of Argento's movies are have. I mean, Suspiria cast Jessica Harper, an American, as somebody going to a German dance school,
yeah,
and you know his movies are like a mix of English and then dubbed. There's some, you know, obvious clear dubbing at points.
yeah.
Um, you know, Daria Nicolodi is in almost all of his films. She's his wife at one point. I
Oh
think by
wow.
this point they might have been divorced or separated. She's Ozzy Argento's mother. She passed away in, I believe, 2020.
Oh dang.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, but she's like she co-wrote a lot of the movies that she worked. She co-wrote Suspiria.
Mm,
Uh, a lot of his movies that are more supernatural based
yeah.
come from her.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's something else you learn in the documentary. Like her family was like very big into witchcraft, and she was like responsible for that. Argento is more of like the Giallo slasher mystery person, and he would like go and lock himself in hotel rooms in various cities while he was writing this, while he was
Oh,
his movies.
that's pretty cool. Yeah, yeah. It's funny because, like, you know, I sort of had an idea of what to suspect watching this. You know, I always see like shots of like eyeballs and stuff when they talk about Dario Argento movies, and I see the blood, which has a kind of thick consistency and it's kind of bright red. You know, and obviously like slash throats. That's kind of what I was expecting, and I did get what I was expecting in this movie. I also knew that it was going to be beautiful to look at. You've used the word bright a couple of times today, and I was just thinking about how I took a class in college. It was third world cinema, right? And I really loved it. One of the third world countries that they talked about was Italy. And you'd be like, wait, Italy, third world country. But it was Italy after World War II and
Mm-hmm.
after Mussolini had been defeated. And there's poverty was rampant everywhere. You know, the city it's just filled with ruins. The cities are filled with ruins wherever they were filming. And I remember watching a movie called Acatone that was about like a criminal that lived in Italy in the time after World War II. It was such a bleak movie, but yet such a beautiful movie. And I saw, you know, Bicycle Thieves just recently, and once again, you just have this movie that's set in this beautiful fucking city that has thousands of years of history, or maybe not thousands, hundreds of years of history. And it's just like often it'll be like empty, and there's all this great architecture. So just the setting itself is beautiful and
Well,
stimulating to look at.
if you're talking about Rome, you're talking about thousands of years of history. I mean, like, you know, the Colosseum, the
Yeah,
aqueducts that are still standing
yeah,
are, you know, I talk to my students all the time about like how, you know, you live in New York and you're like, oh my God, look at that church. It was built in the 1700s. And then you
yeah,
go to Rome and you're walking down the street and you're like, oh yeah, look, the Colosseum, that was built 2,000 years ago, and like gladiators fought there, and like
yeah,
the Roman emperor, like, you know, was given
yeah,
thumbs ups and thumbs downs there, and you're like, yeah, that's real history, right?
yeah,
And there is that sense where it's like, you know, when but you see this in a lot of the European countries. German cinema after World War I, that's where like a lot of horror got its start, in post World War I German expressionism. The
yeah,
Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a lot of Fritz Lang's films come out in that like post war. You know, government has been deposed. The economy is in ruins. People are miserable, and it, you know, a lot of times the filmmakers reflect those ideas. And yeah, I bet you that, you know, a lot of Bava's early work could probably be tied back to that. You know,
yeah,
Argento was again, I keep bringing up the documentary. They make a point of saying that Argento was born during World War II, and he had memories, like he has like memories of like the Rome bombings during World War II, and that like that and that the whole title of the documentary, Panico, he has like this like almost, he has this insane fear that grips him when he's about to start making a movie. And he talks about how he's like borderline suicidal at the beginning of a movie. And like
Wow.
he's like, I had to. And he said that like in the 70s, a doctor told him, put a wardrobe in front of your window so that if you have this like instant desire to just leap out the window and kill yourself, you'll have to move the wardrobe out of the way, and by the time you do that, the feeling will pass. And you're like, what is going through this man's head? And
Wow.
a lot of that is probably PTSD from his early childhood, where he remembers being around death and destruction
Yeah.
of World War II.
Yeah. Jesus Christ, that sounds like what a doctor in like the 70s in Italy would say.
Oh, you're
Okay, you have
suicidal? Block your windows.
yeah. Block your windows, and then by the time you're done moving it, you won't feel
Wrap
suicidal anymore.
wrap tape around your knives so that when you go like this, they'll be dulled.
Yes, or at least have one of those rubber bladed knives that squirts out blood. That might be
Oh
helpful.
yeah, good.
Yeah, but it's funny because we keep kind of talking about the history of Italy and horror cinema. This movie, it's from the little research that I did, they were saying that Argento was trying to get this feeling of like a near future. And this movie, I did notice that there's a lot of scenes where the streets are empty, where we're in these giant houses and there's maybe like two people in them. There is that kind of feeling of like isolation in this movie. With that near future idea, they wanted to make it that there was like a population decrease in the setting. And this movie, even though it might have a smaller population, this has a crazy body count.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my review that it kind of just feels like you introduce a strikingly beautiful woman, and then pretty much within the next scene, she gets murdered. There's a couple that are like throughout the whole movie, they're alive and they're supporting characters, but there's quite a few women that come into this movie, and then like within like 30 minutes or less, they're dead, and I know that should like that could be criticized or whatever, but I think that the whole point of this movie is to be like, when you sensationalize violence, when like violence is your main subject matter that like you're obsessed with, then death doesn't have its effects. Like there's so many scenes in this movie where a beautiful, beautiful fucking woman comes in and then just gets killed like right away. And people like don't seem to be either like really scared or like deeply traumatized that this like woman that they've known that seems like a bright, glowing life is just snuffed out. It's just like, okay, well, all right, it's Tuesday. She's dead. She got chopped by an axe.
I'd like to think that seeing Tenebrae, probably, first time I saw it, I was probably in my 20s, that inspired me to marry a sexy brunette Italian woman.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, this movie has some excellent kills. One in particular, which is probably the kill that this movie is best known for, which, rewatching the movie, this movie plays tricks with my head, because I've seen it about 3-4 times and I always forget, because there's so many beautiful women who get brutally murdered.
Yes.
I always forget the order in which they get killed. So I'm sitting there in the movie theater the other night at the IFC Center.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I thought this kill was later. And then when the big kill happens, which is towards the end of the movie, I'm like, I thought that was the first kill that happened.
Yeah.
Plus, there's insane psychosexual flashbacks.
Yeah.
There is an all-time scene with a high heel.
Yes. Yes.
Sam Zimmerman from Shudder was there because this movie was chosen to be the Shudder Showcase movie. Um, and so he was there to introduce it, and he said that this was his favorite Argento movie. It was my buddy Jared's favorite Argento movie. I didn't realize how much I love this movie, but seeing it again in the theater with that crowd on the big screen, it probably jumped up into my top three, maybe one or two. But it's just, there's so much in this movie to like. And I want to say something about what you said, because you kind of tie back to the whole plot of the movie. You have an author who he writes this like true crime, brutal murder fiction.
Yeah.
And you write about this stuff and it might inspire madness. Argento, I believe, was also dealing with a stalker when he wrote this movie. So you
Right.
have that idea also, as like you're the artistic creator and somebody is taking your work too seriously.
Yeah.
A couple years after this movie, Misery gets made
Yeah.
by Rob Reiner, based, of course, on the Stephen King book.
Right.
And I am sure that those are some of the thoughts going into Stephen King's mind when he wrote Misery.
Sure.
That like somebody out there probably takes my work a little too seriously.
Yeah.
And if I were to ever meet that person, it probably is going to go badly for me.
Yes.
So like there is that aspect to it, and I don't want to get into like who the killer is, because there are probably people who have not seen Tenebrae, and it is streaming on Shudder, and my God, go watch it.
Yeah.
But like when you find out who the killer is, that is part of the motivation. It like part of the motivation is like, your work has created this like, this feeling, and society is being like turned into, bloody madness and smut and you're accentuating gore, so I'm going to show you, and that is part of it. So I do think that that's worthy of conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, but all of that just frames these friggin' kills, which are let me ask you a question. Did you have, because when I was rewatching this,
Yeah.
a movie that I thought about
Yeah.
that I have no clue if this is the truth, but it made me feel like I wonder if this movie watched Tenebrae and took some of the plot points from it.
Okay.
Basic Instinct.
Oh, yeah. 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 There's definitely the idea, right? That an author's involved, right? And there's, people that get killed in a sexual way. That's for sure. There's definitely like this, I mean,
There's also
Verhoeven. Go ahead.
the lesbian couple
Yeah. Yeah.
who are very open with their sexuality, especially one of them who was
Yeah.
just like, who she needs lessons on how to wear a bathrobe.
I don't know. I think that she wore it pretty well, actually.
You know what? Maybe I'll work with her firsthand and give her some tips.
Oh,
Give her some tips.
oh God, he went even further. But then you're like, okay, so yeah, there's
Please don't
definitely
cancel us.
there's some similarities there. It's funny. We're 33 minutes in, and I think we've said like the word giallo maybe once or twice offhand. I was kind of familiar with the giallo, you know, genre, and I think that Basic Instinct, it could kind of fit in that genre. I think what's cool about giallo is that there's like this sort of masked killer, or there's this killer, and it's usually like
killer,
hyper stylized, beautiful women. They're usually killed in very brutal ways, and that's what I was kind of expecting from this. Not to kind of, we've been plugging shit left and right today. I want to plug my channel, Comic Books Transformed. But there is this one X-Men character. His name's Phantom X, and he is based on giallo comics. They have giallo comics in Italy, and they basically made like a masked guy that is like a Giallo killer, and so that's kind of what I was looking for in
Oh,
this.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, you get the black gloves, like
Right.
the shrouded in darkness, like
Right.
I feel like the consummate Giallo film would be Bava's Blood and Black Lace.
Okay.
Which, if you've never seen that, is very good. You know, there's no supernatural elements to a Giallo film. It's really like a murder mystery.
Right.
And then what the Italian directors did was they made the kills super bloody, which is what elevated them from like crime thrillers into like almost slasher movies.
Yeah.
And that's really like Fulci and Argento got started in like legit Giallo movies, like The Bird with the Crystal Plumage by Argento, Don't Torture a Duckling by Fulci. Those came out in the very early 70s. Those are like Giallo films. There's no, you know, they're more crime thriller than they are horror.
Yeah.
I would say that the movie that upped the game for Argento was Deep Red, where that was the movie where he like crossed the line from like crime thriller with some horror elements to no, there's a horror movie where a crime has taken place. And Tenebrae is Sam Zimmerman, again, the host of the Shudder showcases. He made a great point about how this movie came out in '82. It came out nearly a decade to the day after Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and how it shows how like Argento, the Giallo director, and then 10 years later, Argento taking the Giallo and stylizing it into his type of movie with the blood splatter, with the ultra gore, with the insane scenes that like seem to come out of nowhere and like almost don't even fit within the movie you're watching.
Right.
Know that when you sent the like, here's what we're going to talk about, you mentioned the dog scene, and that scene comes out of friggin' nowhere.
But it's
right?
incredible.
It's incredible. And like
Yeah.
it's one of those movies where you're watching it, it's one of those scenes, and you don't know whether to like be like legitimately afraid or kind of start laughing because it comes so out of nowhere.
Yes.
But what's really funny is that I watched this movie one day after watching Inferno.
Yeah.
And there is an even crazier scene in Inferno that comes completely out of nowhere that drew hilarious cheers from the crowd at the IFC Center.
Okay.
And if you get a chance to watch Inferno, I'll just tell you, it starts with a man with a cane trying to drown a bag of rats, trying to drown a bag of cats
Okay.
in the lake in Central Park.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds.
And you're watching this scene and you're like, what the fuck is happening?
Yes.
Like what is happening here?
Yes.
And it climaxes and you're like, okay. And one day later, I'm in the same theater, different, same movie theater, different actual theater, watching this movie. And that scene with the dog happens where it chases Maria. And you're like, what is going on? Like, this dog just randomly chases her into the lair of the killer. And you're like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And you just, I've done it 4 times already, but you love Guillermo del Toro. He has a moment in the documentary. He's one of the talking heads in the documentary, along with Nicholas Winding Refn, as far as like modern filmmakers and the effect Argento had on them.
That's fucking awesome.
One of my favorite lines that Guillermo del Toro has is, when you're a director, you just have to establish that there is just stuff that exists.
Okay.
And once you do that, people will stop questioning it. And he uses the idea of like, when you read a fairy tale, if you start the fairy tale and you go, there's a princess that lives at the top of a glass mountain. You said it. There's a glass mountain. And if you're going to sit there for the next hour and a half going, yeah, but why is there a glass mountain? How'd the glass mountain come about? I don't understand. then it's not for you. Like
Right.
the director is just saying this shit exists.
Right. Right.
And Argento does that. Like there's a scene in Inferno. A girl goes into a basement. There's a hole in the basement, and she goes into the hole and into an underground swimming pool. It just happens. It just exists. Go with
Right.
it. For Tenebrae, random dogs just chase women at night, and and if you're gonna deep dive into it and think about why that happened and whose dog it is and why that dog chose to ferociously go after this girl and why the streets are completely empty, to your point, then this is Italian cinema. There's a moment in Suspiria where a guy's walking his dog, a blind man is walking his dog, and for no reason the dog leaps up and rips out his throat. And you're like, huh? And if you sit there and think about it too much, it's going to ruin the movie for you.
Yes, yes. Well, it's funny because you preface this whole Argento month with, man, these movies can be weird. And so I was sitting there watching this movie thinking, okay, well, I want to see some weird shit. The dog scene is maybe the most bizarre in the sense that it's like relentless and it keeps going. And then it leads the girl right into the killer's house. And then it like the ineptitude of the police force to be like, okay, well, we discovered this, now we're going to move forward and do this. I don't want to spoil things, but like that was kind of weird to me. But as far as like things that kind of made me scratch my head or think were really bizarre, I didn't think this movie had that. What I really loved about that dog scene in particular is it kind of mirrored a scene with one of the victims in the very beginning of the movie where she's walking home from the store and this homeless man just like attacks her just randomly. And there's that sense of, from your own comfortable life that like, okay, there's a homeless person, maybe it's unpleasant, but I'm going to keep walking and that's the end of it. No, this guy like comes after her, curses at her, he shows up at her house. This dog chases this other woman, jumps over a fence. Like it's just incredible fucking stuff.
Every time you think it's over,
right,
it just keeps going. And to me, those are the best, whether it's comedy or horror.
Yeah.
Those are the best scenes. Like, I'm going to make a absolutely insane comparison.
Oh, here we go. Here comes Star Wars or Lost
no,
or
no,
something.
No.
Okay.
The naked man fight in Borat.
Oh, okay. There you go. That is kind of out of left field.
That scene, every time they stop and you catch your breath from laughing, you're like, oh my God, that was so funny. Yeah. And then the elevator opens and the fight continues. It takes it to another fucking level.
Yeah.
And it's that scene with the dog where it's like, okay, she climbed over the fence. She's good. It's over. That was weird. And then all of a sudden the dog just leaps over the fence. And you're like, what?
Yes.
Holy shit.
Yeah. That dog is an incredible fucking dog. There's no CGI in 1982, the year that we were born, by the way. That dog just fucking scales the fence like he's Crypto the super dog. Yeah. The movie, it's what I was saying before about like the dog harassing the woman, the homeless man harassing the woman. That is an interesting parallel because when the killer shows up, there's a couple of scenes where the killer struggles with a victim and they're able to kind of get away temporarily. But for the most part, the killer shows up, strikes, and it's like immediate. Like he's there, throat sliced, axe, whatever, and it's very quick. And I think that there's a commentary within that, right? Because a killer, like the killer that's described in the main character, Peter Neal's, look at that, 43 minutes in, we finally say the main character's name, Peter Neal.
Played by Oscar nominee Anthony Francosa. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Franchosa. But yeah, he was actually an Oscar nominee from the 1950s. He has a very long career. He passed away in like 2006. I thought he was really good in this, by the way. I think
solid fucking player, just left and right. Women just like they're ready to give it to him, man. And this is in the land of these fucking beautiful women. Now I know in our age of being like canceled and like gotta worry about what you say. I mean, I think that you have to point out that like Argento, at least in this film alone, seems to be like, let's cast the most strikingly beautiful women we can find, and then let's brutally murder them. You know, like it's we're not just being pervy guys talking about how beautiful the women are. Like that is a part of this movie. You know,
Oh
they
yeah.
are like a fiction. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no. Like it's and when there is a final reveal, because there are these bizarre flashbacks in the
Yeah,
movie, and I say bizarre
yeah,
flashbacks
yeah,
that finally get explained towards the very end.
yeah,
Uh, you kind of understand why there are beautiful women involved
yeah.
and throughout. And the movie does a great job with red herrings. The
Mm-hmm.
movie introduces the character of Jane as this like scorned ex-lover early on, very early in the movie. And then, she comes back later on. You have Daria Nicolodi as his like assistant, who he apparently has like a completely like non-committal fling with, and that's like just there. You have this other woman who he knows her mother, who ends up being in a same-sex relationship, but she's upset that the woman she's with had gone off and slept with a guy, and that
Yeah.
leads to tension, which we should bring up because that double kill is prefaced by one of the most insane shots in horror movie history. This
Yes.
epic crane shot
Yes.
that is done in one take,
Yes.
where he basically has the camera moving in and out of this apartment and then up and around the building, where he shows finally that the killer is like on like a rooftop ledge looking to get in a window. I read on IMDb that like that scene took like days to film, and that producers were like, let's just cut that scene. And Argento was like, I'll kill everybody.
It's fucking awesome. Yeah. That scene is so fucking good.
And
And
it's prefaced again by the fucking Tenebrae score, which is amazing.
right. And she's playing it on a record. And I have to say that like that scene, there's this feeling when you watch these older movies that we cover for the channel where you start to feel this nostalgia and you feel that cliche thing of, oh, things were better back then. Like, oh, it was just better. Like that fucking vibe of that scene where she's playing a record, she's just come home from a night off. Like it just feels like a different world, man. And like, I'm not saying that because we're middle-aged men that, have kids and stuff, but like, it just feels like back then things were kind of more cool and just like dirty and fucking I don't know. I just love that fucking sequence so much. And then we have that one shot that comes up pretty quickly after that, which is like the shot that they use on the Shudder thumbnail for the movie. But I was gonna say it's weird too with Shudder, they spell it Tenebrae, but I've also seen it spelled without the A. And I'm like, how the fuck am I going to post this video? Because I want to make sure that people see it. It's like, what spelling do I use?
Maybe just do Tenebrae as it's spelled on Shudder with the AE, and then in parentheses you could put Tenebrae with just the E, like Argento Classic from '82, and Argento Classic on Shudder, and that way you cover both of your bases. I did notice that, but like again, Phenomena, which came out in '85, was released in America as Creepers.
Oh, yes.
Because it involves bugs.
Right.
And I know people who know it better as Creepers.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I call it Phenomena, and I have the fucking score on vinyl because I love it so much. But
it's funny. Like once we get to this point where I'm talking about the spelling of the title, I'm like, oh, maybe I've kind of hit a wall, and I think it's funny because I was very tempted to talk about the killer, who the killer was, and like reveal spoilers. But you know what? I think you're really right, Danny, that we shouldn't reveal spoilers because it's very possible someone's watched this and they're like, I'm going to check this movie out. Because the ending of this movie, I actually really, really love the ending of this movie. But if we're not going to spoil it, then I won't go into detail about it. But I thought it was like a very satisfying ending. There were a couple of things I wasn't expecting. Not necessarily the reveal of who the killer was. I kind of guessed that pretty early on. But the way it all goes down, I was not expecting.
I also like that I also like the relationship between Peter Neal and the police, especially the male police detective,
Oh
where
yeah,
he's like an admitted fan, and he's like, I never guessed the killers in your work, except in your last book where I got it right away. And then,
yeah,
and then the
yeah.
movie goes on, and Peter Neal, having been a crime thriller, writer, he's trying to solve the crimes as well from his point of view as the author. And the mystery, whether or not you get into the mystery and whether or not you are able to predict the killer, I think they do a good job of, keeping it mysterious throughout.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, yeah, and the supporting cast is actually pretty great. I love that detective that's with him throughout the majority of the movie. They have this back and forth dialogue where they talk about other books, and we haven't really talked about this too much, but there is like a spoken commentary about violence in books, perversion in books. You know, there's like talk about what's considered acceptable, what's taboo. That's a big part of this movie. And you mentioned Argento's stalker earlier in our video. The stalker was going after Argento, maybe just like kind of calling him, not like trying to kill him with a straight razor, but they were going after him because of like damage to their psyche from watching his movies. And that's like the main idea of this movie, is that like the killer thinks that these books are connected to a perversion in society, and I just think it's really interesting, and I actually really love the discussions between, um, Peter Neal and this one really creepy, weird reporter that's interviewing him, and then there's also the detective, and they're talking about literature. They reference Arthur Conan Doyle. They reference that one quote from The Hound of the Baskervilles, which in this movie there's a fucking supernatural seeming hound in it, right? But they say that one Sherlock Holmes quote that everyone quotes all the time. It stands out. I think you fucking said it like 2 weeks ago on this
Yeah,
channel, right?
about like the impossible and
Yeah.
so it's deeply coincidental that at the same time that I was watching this and doing a review for a short review of the movie when I saw it at IFC, that I was reading Stephen King's The Outsider.
Oh,
And
there you go. Okay.
yeah, and they quote the exact quote about how, because that movie, that book is also about a killer who does awful things to his victims, and for the first probably 60% of the book, you're thinking you're dealing with like a serial killer, and then suddenly there's a like dramatic shift to like something supernatural,
Mhm.
and you get into like the quote of like, whenever you eliminate the impossible, whatever's left is most likely what happened, no matter how impossible that is. And yeah, that's taken from Doyle, that's taken from The Hound of the Baskervilles also.
Yeah. Really great stuff. We should cover the Outsider show if we're searching for things to cover. But I think that we have kind of covered everything about this movie as long as we're being vague about it. It is super enjoyable. Just uh, great to look at. It's fun. There's a lot of blood, a lot of crazy kills. And now I guess my question for you is, which Argento movie do we cover next? You're the Argento expert here.
uh so I would either go in one of two directions. I would either say, since we covered one of his more Giallo-esque like movies, that we pivot and go into either like the Suspiria, Inferno, the Mother of Tears trilogy, or the Three Mothers trilogy, which is much more supernatural, or
Yeah.
we go and we do either something like Deep Red or Opera, which are also like in the same vein as Tenebrae. I would be down
Mhm.
for literally any of it. I want to like rewatch Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which is like his first major hit from 19,
Yeah.
I think 70, 72.
Okay.
And Opera is really like the end of his peak period, and that came out in I think 87 or 88. So I'd
Okay.
be willing to go in either of those directions.
Okay. Well, why don't we, after we stop recording, figure out exactly which one to cover?
Yeah.
I'm down for any of them, honestly, too. So as long as they're on Shudder and I don't have to pay any extra money to, like, let's pick one of those, you know?
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, if you guys have watched this video because you're into Argento, make sure that you subscribe to our channel, give us a like. You know,
Tell us what your favorite Argento movie is.
yeah, maybe. And as a matter of fact, thank you for saying that, Danny, because then you guys could actually influence what we pick next. If you have a recommendation that's for a Shudder Argento movie, send it our way. Maybe that's what we'll end up watching. But we have videos coming out constantly on this channel, thanks to Danny over here. Danny, you want to talk about what else we have coming up on our channel?
Well, we are covering True Detective Night Country, episode 5, released last night as of the time that we are recording. We're going to be recording that video Monday afternoon. You can you can see our reviews of episodes 1 through 4 right now on the channel. I've put up a bunch of short reviews. I have one of Tenebrae. I have one of Inferno. I just put up one on Panico, the Dario Argento documentary, all of which are streaming on Shudder. And I think, moving on to another Argento movie next week, some more True Detective. And looking forward to see where we go in March. I'm already looking to March, and it's February. It's not even Valentine's Day yet.
Yes.
I'm sure I'll have something to say about My Bloody Valentine and Unmasked Part 25 next week, because that's like my annual tradition, is I have to bring those movies up on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, I would be down for actually talking about My Bloody Valentine too. So I don't know, it's something we can talk about after we're done today. But yeah, so we're gonna keep that love flowing and that red blood flowing as we continue with our Argento month. We will